Hey, I'm Micah from OST. Today I'm going to be making a tutorial type video on how to tear down an R32 GTR gear set and reassemble it with a Speedtek gear set. This is how I do it, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. This is just my method of doing it. So sit back, it's gonna be a long one, but we'll completely tear this thing down. I'll show you step-by-step process, and then we'll put it all back together and get it ready for the customer to put in his car. So let's get started. Okay, so as you can see, this is already out of the case. So the customer removed this himself. So I'm going to briefly go over how to remove it from the case. But unfortunately, this is already removed, so I won't be able to show you that process. The first thing you'll want to do is remove the front cover. So inside this bell housing, there's going to be a bearing plate that's got, I think, like maybe 8 or 10 bolts on it. You'll remove that. There's going to be 2 snap rings, one big one for the input shaft and then one small one for the shift rod. You'll remove those. You'll come to here, you'll remove this bolt and the detent spring and assembly. And then you'll of course remove all the bolts for the rear housing. You do not have to remove any of this stuff here, okay? You can leave these shift return springs in, and you can leave these 2 switches in. Don't need to take them out. He's also removed the spring and the ball from the rear housing. You do not need to remove that either. When I pull, you'll remove this cover plate and you'll remove the shift selector, like the gate in here. But once I remove this bolt, I actually put it back in just so that it holds that spring in there and the ball so it doesn't fall out. After you remove this guy, there's going to be the shift selector down in here on your shift rod. You'll tap the roll pin out of that, and then you can't get it out, so you'll just leave it in there and remove it at the same time as the rear housing. Once you get all the bolts out, you can smack this with a dead blow hammer and remove the rear housing and that shift selector at the same time. And you'll also be able to then split the mid plate from the bell housing after that. Sometimes you do have to smack it around a bit with a hammer, but it should pop free pretty easily. Getting the gear set out of the case is very simple. If you find yourself struggling or it won't separate, or you separate it a little bit and it won't go any farther, stop, because you're doing something wrong. It's very simple to get this apart, and it does not take very long. Okay, so here's his gear set removed, and we're going to start the disassembly process. Starts on the 5th and reverse side, and we'll get that apart. All right, so that was removing the roll pin for the like the shift selector. I used to remove the small one and then punch out the big one, but you can actually just do them both at the same time. So now we can get the shift rod out entirely. Should be able to get the shift rod out entirely. There we go. This one's pretty crusty. We're gonna have to clean this one up. All right, now we can get our shift forks out. Pound the pin out of the reverse fork. Okay, next to remove is this bolt. There's going to be a spring and a ball for a detent on this rod. Only some of the mid plates have it. The ones that do not have it, you don't need to do anything. We will not be reusing this assembly, this ball and spring and bolt assembly when we put the Speedtek parts together. Next, I'm going to remove the C-clip for this bearing and the bearing itself. That one has definitely seen better days. This C-clip is definitely the most difficult one, in my opinion, to remove. There we go. Some of the transmissions have a shim below that C-clip and some do not. Idler coming off. Now, there's normally a, I'll show you. So I've placed this back on just so you can see me take it off. The owner already had removed this, but this is the bushing for your idler shaft. The bronze side goes towards the gear. That's the soft side that the gear rides against. It will go on this way, but don't put it on that way. That's the wrong way. It goes this way. Okay, so we'll remove that, remove the gear and the bearings and the tanged one down below. Same deal. Bronze color goes towards the gear itself. All right, so now we're gonna get the hub off. This one's gonna be pulled off. I pull it off with the gear itself. So we'll do that. So now we're going to get off the reverse gear. That was exceptionally tight. They're not normally that tight. Now I'm going to take off this bearing sleeve. Now we're going to take off the reverse cone and the fifth counter gear. And I'm going to slide the idler shaft out at the same time. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that your the tangs on your puller aren't digging into the mid plate. Not that you're going to use the mid plate, but it's just, you know, good practice, especially if you're going to be rebuilding it using this mid plate. Set the idler shaft aside and get the gear the rest of the way off. All right. So we're going to be pressing on these two shafts back and forth. We're probably going to go 1/2 inch on each. The shafts are going to fall out the bottom, so I like to put a packing pad down below on the ground. And then also I'll hold up on the main shaft and counter shaft together. When the counter shaft is almost out, the input shaft is going to want to fall off. So just be careful that you don't drop the input shaft. If you do it right, and it goes well, you should be able to take them all out rather than have all of them fall out at the same time. You'll be able to see when you're starting to get to pushing it just a bit too far when the counter shaft starts to lean in a bit. You can always give the counter shaft a wiggle as well, and that'll let you know that you've gone about as far as you can. The counter shaft should have play. When the main shaft goes as far as it can go, the counter shaft will stop moving or stop wiggling. So we'll shift over and press on the counter shaft now. And we're just trying to press it out of this bearing sleeve. Okay, now the main shaft has started to tilt in a wee bit. So we're going to shift back to the main shaft. There we go. Okay, so I've separated, you saw me separate the main shaft and the counter shaft, which allowed me to remove the input shaft. Now it's gonna come out with the 3/4 sleeve. Make sure that you catch the sleeve and all of the shift inserts that are in the sleeve. Again, I'm forcing upward on the counter shaft and main shaft so they don't fall to the ground. Oh, there goes the main shaft. Okay. So we're gonna press out the bearing and get this, if you can see it or not, this snap ring. We need that to go onto the new bearing. So our bearing is out. We just need to pop this snap ring off. So we've got our alignment dowels pressed out of the factory mid plate. We'll reuse these on the Speedtek mid plate. Okay, so now we're going to work on getting the rest of the gears and sleeves and whatnot off of the main shaft. Make sure this washer and ball are still on the main shaft when you press it out. So we'll remove that now. Get off our first gear. First gear synchro. Okay, there's a C-clip, large C-clip inside here. I'll pop it out. And set it aside. There's actually one on the underside of this sleeve as well. We can't get to that just yet. Unfortunately, the best way I'm aware of to get it out is to simply pull this up. And it kind of stays on the underside of the hub. So this is your 1-2 sleeve. We'll set that aside and then get out the shift blocks. Okay, so now we're gonna go over to the press. We're gonna put the press plates under the, it would be second gear here. And we're gonna press the hub and this bearing sleeve off together. So the service manual says that you need to remove the ball that goes just above this bearing sleeve. Now there is a detent on this back side here for a ball, but I have never seen a ball actually be in this spot only once. And I've taken apart the early model and the late model transmissions. It was in a late model transmission, so I've taken apart other late models and they haven't been there. So, but if you have a late model transmission, be sure that you remove this ball if you have one. Just every time, just check, because as you press this apart, if that ball's still in there, you'll break something. So there's no ball in this one, and we'll press this thing apart. So now we're going to remove the C-clip holding on the 3/4 hub just here. This is another one that's a little difficult. There she goes. Now we're going to press off the 3rd gear and the 3/4 hub. When you're pressing the gear off, be sure to put the plates on the gear itself, not on this washer piece here. That's part of the main shaft. So the final step would then be to remove the, I guess it would be like your noise canceling or your spring gear from the bottom of the countershaft. However, the customer has already done that prior to me getting the transmission. But the parts look like this. So you have the gear itself, the spring, and then the plate that holds it all together. And then there's also a little ball that goes in here, and then a C-clip that holds this whole assembly together. We'll show you how it goes together when we reassemble. All right, so this is the transmission all torn down. And I'm gonna go and inspect some of the parts that we're gonna reuse. And then also you do have to take off the pieces for the input shaft. I guess I'll show that as well. The customer has already taken off the C-clip that goes here. And then on some of the transmissions, there's gonna be another ring that goes below the C-clip. Not all of them have these. I don't know why that is. Some do, some don't. So we'll put that in our pile here. But yeah, there's all your transmission torn down. It's a fairly simple process. As you can see, I didn't have any fancy tools, just a 2-jaw puller, a couple 2-jaw pullers, and an impact gun, and some snap ring pliers. And you can pretty much tear the entire thing apart. So it's really not too difficult. If you find it being too difficult, just stop and look at what you're pulling apart. Make sure you've taken everything apart, because it should come all apart pretty simply. Okay, over here we have the new parts going in. These are all the Speedtek components. These were purchased by the customer and sent in to us. There's a couple pieces that are a little bit different from how we do it, but that's fine. We'll make it work. It's no big deal. Normally we get the alignment dowels with the mid plate. Like you saw, we pressed out the factory ones. We'll also normally get a 1-2 shift sleeve rather than just the 3rd gear shift sleeve or 3/4 shift sleeve. And the reason being, usually the shift sleeves are pretty chewed up. I do not believe this one is in bad condition, so we're fine to reuse this. You want to check the points on these teeth. That's what you're looking for. That's going to indicate wear. And this one's in perfectly fine condition. So we can definitely reuse this. So that is not a problem at all. But when you take this stuff apart, if you're taking it apart before you're ordering parts, have a look at your 1-2 shift sleeve. Make sure that you have a good one, or you'll have to order another one. Got our bearings here. We're not doing the needle bearings one. They weren't included with what the customer supplied. I don't often find that we need to do that. I've never really had any of the needle bearings ever be bad. We've got all new synchros for the gears. We'll check over all of these. Sometimes they do come from the manufacturer with burrs on them, so you'll want to check those over. You'll want to check over all your gears, make sure that they don't have any burrs or manufacturing defects. They'll have like a coating on them. You want to clean that off as best you can. I don't find it's too terribly important, but you do want to make sure you clean it out of the oil holes, because sometimes it does get stuck in the oil holes. So just be sure to do that. Check over all the edges of the gears. Make sure they haven't gotten knocked around during shipping or whatever. Make sure that they're all fine and knock off any burrs that you find. We've got a 5th gear set here to put in, and the customer did get billet shift forks. However, unfortunately, he got the wrong billet shift forks. So this is for a 1-2 on a 2-wheel drive transmission, not a 4-wheel drive transmission. So we'll be ordering the correct shift fork, get him the right stuff. He's also bagged up everything that came out of the brand new transmission case. So I kind of wanted to touch on this. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the reason we have an empty brand new transmission case and a used transmission is that if you have a late model transmission, you have to get a few extra parts to make this Speedtek kit work. And the customer did not have those extra parts. So he opted simply to send me one of his spare OEM old style gear sets. Okay, so we're gonna get started on reassembly, starting with the mid plate. So we have the mid plate here, or the bearing plate, and I'm gonna start putting it together. The first thing that you'll need to do is check these threads. Most of the time, it's just the anodize that makes the bolt hard to go in. It'll only go in, a few threads, because the anodize in here just makes the threads too tight. So you want to tap through it. And then sometimes, and I've already checked this, but it is the case with this one and one other mid plate that I've done, the threads are made by tapping halfway through on this side and then halfway through on the other side, but they don't line up in the middle. So you end up with this cross thread when you try to run the tap through. So check to make sure that you've cleaned these threads before you run these bolts in, because it'll run in halfway and then start cross-threading itself. So we're gonna run the tap through and clean those up. So the next step in the process is to make sure that this hole and this hole fit the shafts that are supposed to go in there. So this one up here holds the reverse gear selector shaft. Oh, that one fits nicely. This one down here holds a shaft for the idler gear. So just try to test fit that. Okay, that one's way too tight. So we're gonna hone that out. This is a pretty common one to hone on these plates. Sometimes you have to do this one, but this one's much more common. So I have like a barrel sanding roll or sanding cartridge that I've dressed down to be the size that just fits in here. And you'll see I'll just go and buzz it a few times and then test fit it and keep going until it fits. Sweet. So that's the fitment we're looking for. The bearing obviously goes in from the side that has the groove on it, because that's where this C-clip sits down into. I just like to spin stuff 180 degrees after pressing it in, just to be sure that nothing's going in crooked. And if it does go in a tiny bit crooked, you spin it around and get it straightened out. Might not have to do that, but it makes me feel better. If you're ever pressing something in and you hear it pop really loudly, like pop, pop, pop as it's going in or out, that means it has a really, really tight press fit, and probably too tight. You probably wouldn't hear it on this bearing because this wall is pretty thin on the bearing here, but you'll definitely hear it on this one. So keep an ear out for when you're pressing that stuff in. If it's popping, it's crooked, or it's going in way too tight. So before you put on this plate, you have to remember to put this bushing in, because the bushing will not go in with this plate on. So let's get that bushing in. This one is a Loctite fit. It'll drop right in here. So we're gonna get the Loctite out. Now we can put the bearing retaining plate on. So this is something that I have found on the last few transmissions I've done. And maybe I've just gotten lucky on the first, several or dozen that I've done. But recently I found that this nub here contacts the inside of the transmission case just a bit. You won't be able to get the rear housing all the way sat down on. So I'm gonna go and I'm just gonna cut probably 1/8 of an inch off of the top of this so that rear housing fits. All right, so we got that top cut down. We'll clear the housing now. Goes like this. Put it on. Now we can put the dowels into the mid plate. There's gonna be 2 holes that are slightly smaller than the others. So if you haven't already, I would recommend getting the service manual and printing it out, at least the section that's relevant, and taking notes, because there's some differences between the OEM and the Speedtek kit, and it helps to notate them in case you have to take it back apart or you're doing another one. So get this, set it out in front of you, and then if you ever have seen my pictures, I actually have the whole breakdown, or whatever you want to call it, of the assembly on the wall, just to reference at all times, because sometimes you can get a bit turned around, and it's helpful to have that reference. So we're going to start with putting the input shaft together. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be checking these oil holes, and I'm going to make sure that there's no blockages. So we're going to get the bearing pressed on. You want the groove to point toward the shaft side of the input shaft. So we'll take this over the press. Next, we're going to install the supplied ring over the top. I'll have to give this one a little bit of a hone. It's a little bit tight. Oh gosh. Next, we're going to put the bearing on the end of the countershaft. I'm going to clean this area here, because that's where the bearing sets down. And we're going to use that bearing to get our end play. Now it's got to be set all the way down. So now that this is on, we're going to flip the countershaft upside down and get the rattle gear installed. There we go. Put some grease on the backside of the needle bearing. It goes on the bottom of the counter shaft so that it doesn't come off when you're moving the counter shaft around or putting your gear set into your mid plate. So the next thing we need to do is check for counter shaft end play. In here, this is where the input shaft is going to go through, and down here is where the counter shaft is going to sit. That ring on the outside there is a bearing race. That's what's going to set our clearance. These races come in different thicknesses, and you'll have to juggle them around to get your desired counter shaft end play. Okay, so I've gone through and tested an assortment of these races. I found one that gives us a good number. So that's 6 thousandths right there. And we want to be between 4 and 10. So that's right on the money. So now I'm going to press on some parts on the main shaft. First, we're going to do the third gear and the third gear 3/4 hub. Now with this Speedtek gear, again, we're going to want to check it over, make sure everything's okay, make sure the oil holes are not blocked. So it's got a little bit of stuff in there. So first we're going to put on our third gear bearing. Nope, that's not it. This is it. And there's some oil on it. Okay. So when you're installing the third gear with the Speedtek sets, it comes with this washer that goes on the top of the gear. This gear is going to set on the main shaft like that, and the aluminum spacer is going to sit against this. The purpose of this spacer is to set the clearance for this gear against the hub. You want the gear to have play like this, just a little bit. If it's too tight, you'll either need to get a different one of these or machine it down. All right, make sure it spins freely and it drops on nicely. That, okay? And then we'll get our synchros installed. So the third gear synchros are a double cone. So we have the inside cone and then the outside. So it's got a dual synchro thing. So what you'll have to check before you put these on, I've had this happen a couple times, so just check it. Take the cone out and make sure that the inner synchro and the outer synchro, these lugs here can slide in and out. Sometimes you'll have burrs or the pieces just won't be cut right. And these aren't Speedtek parts, but just make sure that they fit together properly and clean them up if you have to. So we'll put the inner one on. And then a little bit of gear oil, the cone, and the other synchro. Throw a little oil on that. I like to spin them just to get that lubrication everywhere. And just to make sure that it's doing its job, grabbing that cone. Okay, now we're going to put the hub on. So we're going to assemble the 3/4 hub and shift sleeve combination. We get our shift springs out. We've got our service manual here showing us the direction that this stuff needs to go. The smaller diameter end points towards the front. The coupling sleeve has a classification mark that points towards the rear. So you can see there's that mark right here. So this is the rear. You can also tell on the Speedtek ones they're machined on the front to clear the to clear the drive gear on the counter shaft. So when the service manual talks about having this smaller diameter side go towards the front, It's talking about the front of the transmission, which is this portion here. This is the input shaft side of the main shaft. So we're gonna set it on like this. And you're gonna wanna let these open slots line up with the lugs here on your synchro. Now you can obviously spin this, but just be aware of that when you go to actually push this whole thing together on the press. You wanna make sure that stuff lines up. All right. Let's go press this together. So we've got this hub pressed on, and you can see we've got the lugs lined up with the spaces here. And you can see that we do have side-to-side play. And yeah, we want to be able to move the synchro up and down. So now we can put the C-clip on the top of the main shaft. For the time being, I'm going to leave the shift sleeve off because it kind of just gets in the way and falls off when we try to reassemble the other side of the main shaft. We'll set this aside and we'll put it on when we go to put the main shaft into the mid plate. Now we can start assembly on the other side of the main shaft. See, the first step is I want to assemble the 1-2 shift sleeve. So you got these springs to put on. You want to make sure that the tangs, or the ends of the spring, are on the insides of these. And then when you do end up putting the other spring on, you won't be able to see this spring, at least the way I do it. So on this side, you want the spring to be around this way, and on the other side, you want it to be opposite. Well, I guess that's not opposite. You want it to be opposite. So you don't want, you want the tangs for the other spring to be on the opposite sides on the back side. So what I like to do is mark where my tangs are with a Sharpie so that I can see it from the other side. All right, so now we've got the tang location marked for the spring on the back side. When we go to press this on and put our last spring on, we'll know where the tangs are for the spring on the underside and to put our other tangs, or spring tangs, in a different location. Okay. Next we got our second gear synchros and cone. Again, we're going to make sure that they all fit together. And they do. Perfect. So we'll install our inner synchro. And the cone. And the outer synchro. Great. All right. So the service manual has you install the whole assembled shift sleeve and hub together with the shift blocks and springs in it. I prefer to do it a different way. I prefer just to put the hub on first with the spring that faces the front of the transmission installed on the front. So that would be 3 holes goes towards the front. So that's why I have the spring on this side with the 3 oil grooves. Okay, hub's on. Now we can get the shift sleeves and the shift springs and the shift inserts installed. So I'm going to line up the synchro like we were talking about earlier. See this right there, that slot. We're gonna line those slots up because that's where the shift insert blocks are gonna sit. So when I put these in, using this method, I'm gonna put a little grease on them and help hold them in place. Kind of cover them in some grease. When you're putting the shift sleeves on, there will be one side that has a groove and one side that does not. The grooves face each other. Well, obviously this shift sleeve is not installed, but normally it sits like this. So that means this groove has to face this way. The grooves face each other. There's going to be a small notch in one of the teeth on the 1-2 shift sleeve. There's going to be 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. And those are what the shift inserts ride in. This grease just holds them in place. So they'll just fall right out. Okay. You'll want to lean them in a little bit so we can drop the sleeve on. Remember to have the groove facing the other shift sleeve. Line your notches up. Make sure all the shift inserts are going in properly. There we go. Then we'll put the other spring on, which is this. And you'll remember that we marked the 2 locations where the tangs of the spring were. We want to put this spring on in a different orientation. We do not want to put it on the same orientation as the spring that's under the hub. That's why we marked it before pressing it on, so that we know how to put this one on. Bend it around and latch it into the other one. Next, we're going to install the first gear bushing. Go right here. The service manual says to press it on. I like to heat stuff up and let it drop on. That way I know it's absolutely all the way on. And it's a lot harder to get this stuff, you know, this could fall right off when I flip it upside down to put it in the press. So I would rather just have it drop on and stay on, but you do whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm gonna put a little heat into this and we'll get it on. A little heat I can give it. Okay, so next we're gonna put on the first gear. Now, if you've just put this on and it's still warm, sometimes the gears will not fit simply because this is larger and the clearance between the bearing and the gear and the sleeve right here is only a few tenths or very little. So the gear may not drop on if this is hot, but depends how much heat you put into it. We'll put our first gear bearing on. Put some gear oil on it. Okay. This is our Speedtek first gear. Go through, clean it, check your oil holes, put your synchro on, and drop it on. All right, so when you put the first gear on, just like you did on the second gear synchro, you'll need to line up these notches with the shift blocks in the shift sleeve. So with the gear forced all the way forward or downward, I want to be able to stick my screwdriver in here and make sure that this synchro has play. And I think this is a good example because it doesn't have any. See that? I'm prying on it, but this synchro is not moving. So what's happening is this gear is pinching this synchro up against this hub. So what we need to do is we need to shave the top of this synchro down so that it's not pinched in here. If you put this together and you don't check this and this is pinched, it will wear this synchro right out as soon as all this stuff starts spinning, because it's literally trying to grab this gear just with the stack pressed together, and it's going to essentially be partially engaged in 2 gears, or be engaged in whatever gear you're in, plus partially engaged in this one. So I'm going to take this synchro back out, and I'm going to shave it down, and we'll put it back together, and I'll show you what the improvement looks like. You have to check this on every gear that you put on. As you can see, this is actually stuck on the gear. So it was pressed onto the gear. All right, so we have our synchro trimmed down. You can see that. So I usually just take maybe 10 thousandths at a time off and come in and test it. So that's what we've done here. I've actually taken about, I think, 15 off, because I think it was just by feel of how that gear was grabbing. I think that's going to be what we want. Okay. Oh, I'm going to have to take a little more off. So I have now taken 15 off of this surface, and I took another 10 off of this surface. So let's throw this in. Now again, we're doing this without the spring. I'm just trying to get this gear to fit. And then once we do, we'll put the spring back on and see what we need to do from there. Okay. So it is currently bottomed out on the hub right now, because there's daylight between the hub and, well, I should say it's bottomed out on the inside edge of the hub, not the outside. There's daylight on the outside. So let's see what happens when we put the gear on again. Definitely an improvement, but it should be spinning freely, and it is not. It's not unusual to have to trim these, but I'm having to trim it more than I would expect. Took another 10 off. Certainly getting better. But remember, we still have to fit that spring under there. I think it's probably on the shift blocks now. So I'm wondering that if I've taken off enough to the point that it's actually riding on these, that synchro is riding on these shift blocks. So I'm going to remove the shift blocks real quick, and we'll do another test fit. It was sitting up on the shift blocks. Unfortunately, when you do it in the lathe, you can't get into those little pockets where the shift blocks sit. Let's see how much free play we have in this synchro. So forcing the gear downward, you can see that it lifts up and drops. That's probably the smallest amount that I'll be okay with. So let's have a look at what this one, see how much play this synchro has. That's a normal amount of play. This is much less, but it will do the job. Basically, you just want to be able to spin this gear. Hold the synchro with your fingers, push the gear down, and spin it, and you shouldn't feel any resistance from that synchro. So now we know the synchro at least fits, but now we have to clearance it for the shift blocks, because obviously it's holding those up. And we'll probably have to take some more off that bottom area to fit the spring that goes around this hub. We will keep sneaking up on it. So as you can see, I've put it all back together. I wanted to test something. This is the factory synchro that came out of this transmission. This is the one I've been cutting on. I wanted to see if the factory synchro fits. So we're gonna line it up. Okay. Put our gear back on. Oh wow, yeah, look at that. So you can see that it's not being held up by the synchro, and I bet you it's got a good amount of play. Let's get our shift sleeve out of the way here. I wouldn't say a good amount, but it's got play, which is perfect. I mean, as long as there's some. But yeah, that is not, you can hold the synchro and spin the gear just fine. So the issue is not the gear. The issue, and you can see that the synchro stayed, it didn't stick to the cone, on the gear like the other Synchro has each time I've removed the gear. So the issue is this aftermarket Synchro right here. So this is supplied with the kit, but you can always tell an OEM versus a aftermarket Synchro. Aftermarket Synchros are very shiny. This is dirty, obviously, but the OEM Synchros won't look a whole lot lighter than this. You know, they kind of have this dull look to them. New OEM. So the issue is this new Synchro. I went and I surfaced it one more time on the lathe. You can't go and keep going forever because eventually you'll run into the top groove here. But we've taken about, I think, 20 thou off the top, maybe 15 off of this, and then I went in and notched the area for the shift blocks as well. And I've already test fitted this, so I know it works. We'll put our gear back on, and you can see that now we're able to spin the gear, and the Synchro doesn't even move. The Synchro can move independently of the gear. It's exactly what we want. We do not want this stuff to be caught up together. So being able to do this with the gear force down is perfect. We can check our play, but I know we'll have a good play. Yeah, perfect. So this is good to go. All right, now we can get on with the rest of the assembly. Put a little grease in the hole, stick the ball in, grease holds the ball, and we have our washer. I'm going to grease up the washer as well to help hold it in, so that it stays here located while we're putting this main shaft into the mid plate. Next, we're going to get this side ready. Remember before we left the 3/4 shift sleeve off so that it doesn't get in the way? We're going to install it now. The indication marks on this shift sleeve and on this shift sleeve face each other. And these shift inserts, the little spring looking things inside here, go into these voids in the hub. So you line those up. Okay, we're ready to put the input shaft together now. We're going to put the spacer that we removed from the other input shaft in, then the bearing, and then our Synchro. Be sure when you put this Synchro on that it fits properly. There's two styles of Synchros. I have ended up with the incorrect one before. The old style that we're working with here has a matching inside diameter to this cone. The new style Synchro has a larger inside diameter, and if you aren't watching, it will sit down on top of this because it's larger, but it won't grab the cone. It'll be too large, but you could still install it with the wrong Synchro on it. So just be sure that you have the right one in the kit that you got. The spaces here are going to line up with those shift inserts. Perfect. Okay. Now we're going to put this whole assembly with the counter shaft into the mid plate. So to start this process, we're going to stick the main shaft into the mid plate bearing here. We're only going to tap it in a little bit, and then we're going to put the counter shaft in. It doesn't take much to get the main shaft in. We're only going to give it a couple whacks, and then we'll slide them both in together. So I'll see if I can turn this so you guys can see that better. So just remember when you're doing this to hold on here to the input shaft. Don't hold here because this can slide right off. All right, I'm going to push or pull towards me on the input shaft. At the same time, I'm going to hit it right on this bearing support plate. We're only going to get it in here just a little bit. Okay, that's just enough. Just enough so that we can still sneak the counter shaft in. Okay, with the counter shaft in the needle bearing at the bottom, sometimes you have to pick at it with a screwdriver, sometimes you get it straight away. But with the counter shaft in, I'm going to hold up on the counter shaft and pull towards me and hit the bearing support plate. All right, if you could, I don't know if you can hear that on the camera, but the sound changed when the main shaft bottomed out in the bearing. So now I'm just gonna rotate it 180 degrees and give it another couple hits just to be sure that it's seated the whole way around. There we go. All right, that's done. You'll notice that they don't turn very nicely. That's not because you've done anything wrong. That's just because this anti-rattle gear on the back is preventing these two gears from meshing. So you can spin it around to the point where they do mesh, and then everything will turn nicely. So let's get this into the bell housing and put the fifth and reverse side on. Before you stick it in the bell housing, be sure that this needle bearing is still on the back of your counter shaft. That's what the grease is for, so it doesn't fall off when we're hammering on it like that, or when you turn it upside down to drop it into the bell housing. So we're gonna put the fifth main gear on. If it is an OEM gear, you'll have to heat this up or tap it on to get that press fit. Fifth gear bushing for the counter shaft. Fifth gear counter gear bearings. Next up is the fifth counter gear and the idler shaft. These go on at the same time. So put them together like this and drop them in. The next is the reverse gear bushing. We'll heat this up and drop it on. Next is the reverse cone. This is also a press fit, so we'll heat this up and put it on. Next, we're going to assemble this synchro and sleeve assembly. You'll see that there's a tapered end here and a not very tapered end here. This tapered end points towards the rear of the transmission, so it's going to be facing up as we assemble this. You have a couple springs here. These springs are going to loop onto the synchro here. So I'm going to put it together. The synchro and the springs are going to go into the front of the sleeve, which is the non-tapered side. So there's 3 slots around here where the teeth are a slightly different shape. Just look for them, and that's where these springs go into. A little bit finicky to get them in, a little difficult sometimes. All right, and then we got our other synchro, and the spaces around the outside line up with these springs that we just installed. And make sure that the springs are all the way in. That one wasn't all the way in. It's got to go in and clip. Perfect. So once you have this assembled, pop this synchro up, grab your reverse counter gear here, and just make sure that this synchro fits it. Okay, it does. I've gotten sets in where this synchro was a different diameter than this. So just be sure that you have the right one before you press this on. So we'll put that back on. So now we're going to heat this up and press this on. Next, put the tanged bushing washer on the idler shaft and the bearings. Bit of oil. Idler gear itself. Now some have this anti-rattle gear on it and some do not. So don't be alarmed if yours is not. But you do want it to go all the way down past the rattle gear. Next we're going to put the other washer on. You'll see that again it's got a bronze side and a silver side. The bronze sides go towards the gear so that it can rub against it. It's a softer material. We're going to put some grease on this so that when we put it on here and we go to put the rear housing on and everything like that, it doesn't come off. Next, we're going to do the reverse main gear. Bearings. Oil. Reverse main gear. Next, we're going to install the reverse hub. The machine side faces the gear. So now we have the half moons to install. They go in this slot just above this hub. We want this fit to be relatively tight, but not so tight that you can't actually get them in. This looks like it's going to be a bit on the tight side. I'm going to try to tap it in and see how it feels. Start with an edge, not the center. Yeah, that is too tight. Okay, so I put these in my grinder and I got them down 1/1000th of an inch. I've test fitted the one and it had a really nice fit, so we'll put them in. You want to just be able to lightly tap them and have them go in. And again, do it on the outside, not in the center like this. They could split. Very good. You really do not have to hit those very hard. I don't know if it's able to be seen easily on camera. But you should just lightly tap them in. Do not force them. So this is the spacer that came out of this. We'll see if it's a good size to fit the clip back in. So when you get to this step, you have two options. Since that C-clip doesn't fit over this factory spacer, you can grind this spacer down, or you can use some shims that I got to do exactly this. Well, there it is. We've got the whole rear section done. I want to get this back up on the table and into the bench vise, and we'll put the forks in. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys real quick how this transmission works and what all these parts are now that we're all back together. Maybe I should have done this before I took it apart, but I didn't. Anyway, this might help you if you're watching this whole video before you start to kind of get an idea of what parts are what. So we're going to concentrate on the front half of the transmission just for now, because that's really what we're changing, what we're altering. We're not so much worried about the fifth and reverse side, although we did put that taller fifth gear in, but we're going to concentrate on this. So this is the front half of the transmission. This is all inside the bell housing. This is the input shaft, goes into your clutch. This shaft that we saw in here that we put all the gears on is called the main shaft. This shaft down at the bottom is called the counter shaft, because it spins counter to the input shaft and the main shaft. So we'll start here. This is the first main gear. This is the first counter gear. So first, second, third, and this is not fourth. This is your drive gear. There is no fourth gear. You do engage the shaft itself, but that just connects the whole thing together. These gears are always engaged, always spinning. This is not fourth gear. So these are the shift sleeves. So when the forks are on and grabbed onto these shift sleeves, when you're shifting the car, that is what's moving the shift sleeve back and forth and engaging and disengaging the gears. So right now, this is in neutral. These shift sleeves are not engaged in anything. So I'll be able to turn the input shaft without turning the output shaft. Now it is binding up back here because the front of the counter shaft is not supported, but you get the idea. We're in neutral. The input shaft and the output shaft can turn independently of each other. Okay, so when you shift your car into first gear, your shift forks slide this shift sleeve into engage first gear. Remember, we put this hub on, and there's these engagement teeth on the gear itself. The synchro just slows this gear down and allows the shift sleeve or slider to slide all the way in and engage first gear. So now we are in first gear. You can see I'm spinning the input shaft and the output shaft is turning. Okay, when you do second gear, the shift sleeve goes into second gear. The shift sleeve connects this hub to the engagement teeth on second gear. Okay, so now that this is all explained and hopefully you have a better understanding of how this all works, I am going to put the shift forks on. So here are the Speedtek shift forks. I'm going to modify these a bit, then install them. I modify them to improve shifting feel. It's just something I like to do. And we'll do that and get them on. Okay, this thing's ready to go back into the bell housing. Before you do, be sure to put your baffle plate into the mid plate.